Albany State offers the controversial Marcus Stokes a scholarship in a move that I completely would have not done. And then also Bowie State takes the interim tag off of Kyle Jackson. Oh yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now, of course, I'm Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives, which you can see right here at the bottom of the screen, or if you're on the audio side of things, of course, don't forget the S on the end. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. And visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And I want to start off with something very serious. I don't think there's any way that I would have offered Marcus Stokes a scholarship as an HBCU coach. I just don't think I would have. Albany State did, and there's no way that I would have done the same. So I feel like I need to first explain the situation, because he has been offered by Albany State, but that doesn't exactly mean that this has actually crossed your timeline. And there's the real reason it didn't cross my timeline at all when it happened months ago, when the incident happened months ago that I'm about to describe. So let me tell you what happened. So basically, Marcus Stokes was in his car. This is a white kid, white quarterback. He was in his car and he had a song playing. And in that song, he said the N-word. Like Stokes himself said the N-word hard. Like, I mean, he said it hard, not with a hard ER, but just hard. I was like, wow. Right. So he's a coveted recruit. That's important. He's a coveted recruit, and he actually was a commit to Florida. He flipped from Penn State to Florida. And when this happened, Florida took his scholarship. Now he says it was part of a song, and that, you know, everybody has different opinions on the word itself, and then also when white people and just people who aren't black should be able to use it, or if they should be able to use it at all, right? Everybody has their difference in opinions on that. But to me, to go out and put this into the public domain, I think it was a Snapchat video, but still public, you do this, that's just audacious to me. Like, when you look at knowing you're a Florida recruit, I would hope that you understand that you have something to lose by doing this. You're not just a regular 17, 18-year-old. You have something that you really could lose, that you value, and you did lose it. You did value it, and it's gone now because of this. He did apologize for the video. He took that apology down. I had to find a screenshot of it. I don't like that he took it down. To me, it kind of makes it a little less sincere, but I also know he likely did not want that to be the focus. And this did happen, I think, November. It was either in November or October that this actually happened. So it's been months since this has happened. But I would have liked to still seen that up there, because it kind of shows a little less remorse for me, kind of, you know, but I'm not going to get into it completely. He's probably not coming to an HBCU. He's probably not coming to Albany State, but Albany State is the first and only HBCU to offer him. And when he announced that, he said, "I am proud to say Albany State is my first HBCU offer," or whatever the terminology typically is. Wouldn't have been me. It wouldn't have been me for a variety of reasons, but mostly, like, I seen the taglines, and the taglines are instantly what I thought. Not the fact that the taglines would exist, but the actual words. Marcus Stokes, quarterback who got caught saying the N-word, gets an offer from Albany State. I don't care if it's a bad look or not. It just doesn't go with what I stand for. To me, as an HBCU, you have to stand firm in this. I don't care if he's talented or not. See, you said the N-word. Nobody forced you to say it. You said the N-word. Repercussions come from that, period. And I'm not going to lecture Marcus Stokes, or maybe the people who like Marcus Stokes. They should all know the repercussion that he got, the consequence that he got, was Florida dropped him. You wanted to go to Florida. They said, "We don't want you anymore because we don't want that on our campus." If they don't want that on their campus, the PWI campus, I think it's common sense that we should not want that on an HBCU campus. I treat that kid like the Grinch. I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. And I'm certainly not going to be a Cindy Lou Who. I'm not here to make his heart grow 3 times bigger. I'm not here for that. You made a mistake. You got consequences. But then when you come in as an HBCU, you give them that scholarship. To me, it kind of feels like the proverbial pass. You know what I mean? You know that proverbial pass that everybody talks about. See, here's the thing. If I was a white person who said the N-word, and then I got some sort of consequence, but then an HBCU came through and offered me a scholarship, I'm running all up and down that campus saying the N-word. I turned into an episode of the Boondocks, specifically the S-word. Be all up in the calf. Can I borrow a French fry? And if you watch the Boondocks, you know the reference. Because here's the thing. Giving somebody who did what they just did a scholarship to an HBCU, it feels like you've kind of wiped away the consequence and you've just given acceptance. Yeah, come on. And, I don't like to play the whole, if it's not good for a PWI, why is it good enough for us? But here's the thing. That should be more impactful to an HBCU than it is for a PWI. If they don't want that represented on their campus, that says enough. I don't need to give the other half of that. And I understand that Coach Quinn Gray, who just got there, right? Coach Quinn Gray, he was at Memphis, and Memphis offered Stokes. So, it's clear that I like this player. I wanted him at my other school, but there's a saying we got in Domino's: all money ain't good money. You got to look at the long haul. You got to look at that. Yeah, it might make my pockets fat now, but what it's going to do for my opponent later? What's it going to do? What's the alternative? It's not just about how much money I'm going to make in this situation. That's the way I kind of look at it. Marcus Stokes is probably a good prospect. There's a reason that Florida and Penn State wanted him. All money ain't good money. Keep that away from me. Keep that away from me. I don't want any parts of that, and I don't think that HBCU should be the part where he would, get redemption. Like I said, there's more than enough schools who are on the FBS level and FCS level too, I think, that have offered him that he probably won't go D2. And I don't want the kid's recruitment to be stalled out completely. He got his consequence. He lost his scholarship to the place that he wanted to go. I'm not asking for him to just be on the couch next year. He's 17. I'm sure he still says it in the comfort of his own home. He won't be stupid enough to say it on camera no more, but I'm sure he still says it in the comfort of his own home. So I would like to say he makes mistakes, but we'll see. I heard the way he said it. That wasn't I just say it when the music is on. Nah, brother, you got that pass from your friends or something. Don't think Albany State should have been another one who gave him acceptance. I'll leave it there. And going forward, we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about Kyle Jackson, somebody who had the interim title taken off of him at Bowie State. And it actually continues the tradition of one Bowie State alum giving to another. And we'll talk about that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Before I get into that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. This is still our first week partnering with our newest sponsor on the network. And FanDuel is the number one place for our official or for any sports betting, any sports wagering, any odds you hear, they come from FanDuel themselves. And the NFL playoffs are here. You only have a couple of days. Sunday, the NFC and AFC championship game are going to be played, and I'm over the moon. I cannot wait to watch these matchups. I actually think they are absolutely fantastic. The linebackers of San Francisco against the running game of Philadelphia. Mahomes versus Burrow 4, I think. Yeah, 4. I think that's what it is. Like, these are all great matchups. Put your money down on it. And if you only want to bet real quick, bet a little bit, bet $5. When you make your first $5 bet, you will get $150 back. $150 back in free bets that you can use on whatever. You ain't got to bet big, but you will still get that free money. So that's only if you're a new user. But make sure you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. And remember, make every moment more. And as we continue rolling with today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen of the day, make sure you're checking out Locked On College Basketball, which everything you need around the sport of NCAA basketball in one place. And make sure you check it out because you can get it wherever you listen to your podcast. And I know for a fact the host is really talented and he knows what he's talking about. So let's talk about a little bit of a tradition. Kyle Jackson has had the interim title taken off of his name. He is the official Bowie State head football coach. And with that, he has continued a tradition of Bowie State alum handing it down to other Bowie State alum. Not consecutively, but they have still set up the next person for the foundation. It all starts with Dr. Henry Frazier III. He's the first one. Obviously, nobody puts him into play because he's the first alumni to come from the school to actually be the head football coach there. So nobody sets him up, but he does set up everybody else. He's there from 99 to 2003. And who was on his staff? Damon Wilson. Damon Wilson was a football player right before Frazier got there. Frazier gets there. He's on the coaching staff with him. Once Frazier leaves for PV, because he's actually very successful, he's the most winningest coach in school history at the time of his departure, and he goes to PV. Coach Wilson actually goes to Texas Southern and then joins him at PV later on, but they're both in the SWAC, so they both leave at the same time. Once Damon Wilson comes back, now you see the tradition. Damon Wilson comes back and he's the head coach. Once you see something succeed the first time, once you see a big movie, right, what happens? It's very successful. You get sequels. And the sequel doesn't follow the exact same plot, but you see a lot of the same aspects. You see some of the same, oh, they do this, they do that. But it's not the exact same story. There's still tweaks on it. So when Damon Wilson comes in, he's very successful. He turns Bowie State into a powerhouse. And while he's turning Bowie State into a powerhouse, do you know who's on his coaching staff? Kyle Jackson. We started off this topic talking about him. So we know what he ends up being. He ended up being a head coach as well. It's over and over and over. That's a little too many overs. It's a little OD. But you see the point. Henry Frazier comes in. Damon Wilson is on his staff. He goes to head coach. It's not consecutive. It's not right after it, but he comes back and he's the head coach. He set that foundation for that to be able to happen. Now you see Kyle Jackson. He was a player underneath Wilson. And then once he graduated, he comes in and he gets his foundation. He starts his coaching at Bowie State. You see that? He leaves just like Damon Wilson left. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Sounds really familiar. Like, oh, I've seen this story before. Yes, because you saw it with Damon Wilson. But instead of leaving and coming back to be the head coach, Jackson leaves, comes back, and he's back at being a positional coach, defensive coordinator. He starts working up the ranks. And that's because Wilson just stayed much longer than Frazier did, right? You see Frazier, he was in and out in less than 5 years. But you look at Wilson, he's around over a decade. And then he finally went to Morgan State. He finally decided to be the head coach on an FCS level. And who's right there set up? The man who has been slowly building up more and more responsibility. And now you're looking at Kyle Jackson as a guy who goes from being a positional coach to being a defensive coordinator, to being to being an interim head coach. And now he's the official head coach. You see it. You see these things. You see the pattern. You see the trends. You see it going. So now that he is the official head coach, now that Kyle Jackson has officially been hired as the Bowie State head coach, you see the tradition going. And that tradition is one where alumni help alumni, which is what alumni are supposed to do. You go Henry Frazier. He gives Damon Wilson his start. Damon Wilson ends up being the head coach at Bowie State. Bowie State then gets Kyle Jackson. Kyle Jackson goes to the coaching staff after being a player. And who sets him up? He takes over for Damon Wilson. So while it's not successive, it didn't go Frazier, Wilson, Jackson, it's still alum helping each other get into the right position to take over for this. You don't want to say he passed the torch. That's fine. But I will say he set the foundation for them to be in this position. And that's exactly what alum is going to be. And I think that's a great tradition. Who knows who's going to be the next guy? Who's going to be the next player underneath Jackson or just some former Bowie State player regardless that comes in and he's an offensive coordinator. And once Jackson decides he wants to move on, you go ahead and put that guy in. I think it's a great tradition to continue passing down. It can't go on forever, but every time that it does happen, it's something that I will love to watch. And speaking of loving to watch, how about MEAC basketball? MEAC basketball has been so fun. You have a three-way tie. We talked about Morgan State on yesterday's episode. Now we're going to talk about University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, and Howard today and how they are the hottest teams in the conference as we continue with Locked On HBCU. And as we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate all of my segment 3 folks. In University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, and Howard are the two hottest teams in the MEAC. Yesterday, we discussed Morgan State and talked about how they've been really good, and Isaiah Burke has been shooting them to a lot of success. But I also did mention that they are a part of the 3-team tie. And in the name of the theme of ties and breaking ties, let's talk about why I say Maryland Eastern Shore and Howard are actually the two hottest teams in the conference. Let me tell you why I think they're hotter than Morgan State. Because Morgan State has won 6 of their last 7, right? Or 7 of the last 8, excuse me. And I give that to them. But Howard has a similar streak. Maryland Eastern Shore has a similar streak. So it doesn't hold as much weight because you're right there. Now we're splitting hairs. Like that's the thing. Once we get into splitting hairs, you always have to remember, this is how I take it. If we're talking about the best teams or the best people in something, we have to criticize or take away and say where somebody lacks in another one. It's not disrespectful, but at the end of the day, if I'm going to be comparing great resumes, I'm splitting hairs. I'm splitting hairs. It's not the difference of 1 to 17, but the difference between 1 and 2 can still be divided in little things that does have separation and does create that separation as well. So they have very similar winning streaks. So it's like, okay, that not as much. And you look at the fact that Howard actually beat Morgan State. And you look at the fact that Morgan State and Maryland Eastern Shore on 4-game winning streaks, active 4-game winning streaks. That's eventually, that's what really made the difference for me. 2 teams on a 4-game winning streak, the other team on a 1-game winning streak, even though they just got off of a 6-game. It's just, all of those things in totality is still a tie at the end of the day. But that's how I was able to decide that these were the 2 teams that I wanted to say were the hottest. So let's talk about these teams. And let's start off with Howard, because they have not lost a game since they knocked off Norfolk in that last minute thriller, that controversial ending, if you want to call it that. But they have not lost a game since then. And they scored 86 points in that game. That's the lowest amount they've scored in this 4-game winning streak. 88, 89, 90. So they were just climbing, right? Still in that same ballpark. 86 ain't even low, but it's the fact that 86 is your lowest in this 4-game stretch. And even when you look at the other game that they won in conference play, it was 84. So you're seeing when they win, they're between 84 to 90 points. And anytime you put up 84 to 90 points, you're going to be a tough team to beat. It can happen, but it's a shootout. It happened to Norfolk, actually. So it can happen, but you're going to be a tough out, and you're at least setting yourself up for success. And it's that offensive prowess that they have. You see the ability to shoot the 3. They have 3 players, Howard does, the Bison, have 3 players who are in the top 10 in 3 points made per game in the conference. That's a big part of when you're shooting and you're making this many points. When you're making or scoring this many points, you got to be shooting and making a good amount of 3s more times than not. If you're going to do that consistently, you got to be able to do it, man. There's not too many teams who can get near 90 points on a consistent basis without making a good amount of 3s, and Howard shouldn't be the exception. And when I talk about Howard offensively, defensively, these aren't close games. Outside of that Norfolk game, these are not close games. And that's because their defense is doing everything that they need. They don't even need to score those 90 points. They don't even need to score 87, 88. They don't need to do that. They do it because they're good offensively, but they don't need to. Their defense is good enough to where they can win a game. They only score in the 70s, right? Only. But if we're talking about defense, I can't harp too much on Howard. I got to go ahead and switch over to Maryland Eastern Shore. Maryland Eastern Shore, by far, dominant team. If we're talking about those 2, by far, they are the dominant team. They win with dominant defense. And I love calling back, because if you remember, when we talked about Maryland Eastern Shore's first game in conference play, it was against Norfolk. And we know how we speak about Norfolk. We speak about them with so much respect because we understand what they are. And not just what they've been. I still think they're a very good team. They lost to Norfolk. They lost that game. But it wasn't by much. That game was 57 to 46. 57-46 is the score. That's dominating defense. You just couldn't score enough points. And really the fact that you're, and that probably brings down their number a little bit, their average a little bit. But you look at the fact that Maryland Eastern Shore is the 7th ranked out of 8 teams, 7th ranked offense in the conference, and they're 4-1. I think that just proves how dominating that their defense is. If you cannot be one of the middle of the pack really scorers, and yet you still have only lost to 1 team, your defense has to be very good. Defense has to be very good. And, I'm not trying to crucify the offense. I'm just saying that I'm boosting up the defense, okay? So, to me, if we're going to talk about the absolute hottest team, because we're breaking ties, we have to get to the 1. I'm gonna say Maryland Eastern Shore because they have won 8 of their last 9, which is the best streak of them all. But then also they're in a position to control their destiny in a way that nobody else is. See, we're all 3-way tied right now. Morgan State, Maryland Eastern Shore, Howard, all 3 tied at 4-1 in the conference. Maryland Eastern Shore is the only one who actually controls their own destiny. Not in the way of talking about number 1 seeds. It's way too early for that. It's way too early to discuss what the number 1 seed will be and controlling your destiny in that. I'm just talking about in this tiebreaker. If we're just talking about breaking up this tie, because it does have to break up. We're just talking about the number 1 spot in the seedings, right, at this moment. But when it comes to that, they've already beat Howard. Yeah, Howard beat Morgan State, but Maryland Eastern Shore already beat Howard. So now you see that. and Maryland, Eastern Shore, and Morgan State are going to compete against each other. So at the worst, by Tuesday, because that game happens Monday, at the worst on Tuesday, you could have a situation to where if Maryland Eastern Shore just wins both of these games, they're number one in the conference essentially by themselves. Because they played both teams and they beaten both teams. At the worst, Howard, we tied for number one with them, but you beaten Howard, so that's a tiebreaker that I can easily say, all right, they're tied for one, Howard lost, they lose the tiebreaker, enough said. But I can't wait for it. They control their destiny. MEAC basketball has been phenomenal, and I can't wait for this to continue going. I hope to continue to be able to catch more games because now I have a little bit less to do. I can get my eyes on more games than I have been able to, and I hope that I'm able to catch them more and more. And I hope you're doing the same thing with this show, Locked on HBCU, because I do it for you. I promise you, right? So I hope you're catching us more and more. And when you're doing it, make sure that you're making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked on College Basketball with everything you need around the sport in one place wherever you listen to your podcast. So go get that. And on tomorrow's episode, we got Gerald Huggins of Draft HBCU coming on to detail some of the players who are in the NFL Shrine Bowl, because I want you to get a little bit of a note on some of these players and things that you need to look for in this game on Saturday. So in the meantime, in between time, until the next time we see each other, take care, stay blessed. Peace.